I want to thank you all again for joining us for the second webinar in our 4-part GATE mini-series that started last week with how to relate successfully with gifted youngsters and continues today with what differentiation should look like. As I mentioned before, we will be recording this, and the recording will be available within 24 hours. If you signed up through our extension website, you automatically will receive a copy of this presentation. But if for some reason in 24 hours you don't receive that email, you can access the recording manually by going to uci.webex.com, selecting Training Center, going to Recorded Sessions, and then looking for the title of this webinar, which again is What Differentiation Should Look Like. My name is Amanda Angelmo, and I am a program representative here at UC Irvine Extension, and today I'm speaking on behalf of my director, Angela Jante. Just to give you a little synopsis of what we're going to be doing here tonight in the next hour, I'm going to start off for the first 5 minutes giving you guys a quick snapshot of what our Gifted and Talented Education Certificate Program looks like here at UC Irvine Extension, talk about some of the upcoming classes and topics that we cover. And then for the bulk of this, I'm going to pass it over to Kim Dodds, who is our keynote speaker tonight and the coordinator of GATE Teacher Training and Parent Education for Newport Mesa Unified School District. And she's going to give her presentation on what differentiation should look like. With whatever remaining time we have today, we're going to answer as many questions of yours as we possibly can. And I just wanted to direct your attention very quickly to the right side of the screen. You should see a Q&A box and a chat box. If you have any technical difficulties today with the actual webinar process, go ahead and shoot a chat message to UCI Eric. He can take care of any of your technical problems. If you have a general question for myself or for Kim, please submit that in the Q&A box because that gives us a better idea. It organizes your questions a little bit better, so we'll be able to get through more at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about the GATE program that we have here at UC Irvine. We have a full certification program that's fully online, and it consists of 9 quarter units. So students can pick from a variety of topics and unit values to make up those 9 quarter units. As I mentioned, we're fully online, so we're open to individuals not only here in California, but all over the country and also all over the world. And we're also available on-site at local schools and district offices. We provide in-services, individual GATE courses, and the full certificate program anywhere in Orange County and the greater LA County. Whoops. Okay, give me all your poll responses. Thank you for filling those out. The program that we have here is designed for 3 specific types of people. First are individuals that are interested in gifted and talented education theory and practical applications. So we actually do have some parents that take some of our classes like parental involvement or meeting social emotional needs of the gifted. Our program is also designed for individuals exploring entry or career transition into GATE instruction. And finally, it's designed for teachers who are committed to curricular differentiation for all students. We still have one course that's available for the current quarter, the spring quarter, and that is Learning Styles with David Gagassian. And that is a 1-unit course running from May 18th to June 14th online, and it costs $350, and you can register at that link. That's a live link. It'll take you right to the course registration page. This summer, which the quarter starts June 22nd and runs through mid-September, we have 3 other courses that are being offered online: Identification and Programming for the Gifted, Meeting the Social and Emotional Needs of the Gifted, and also the Arts in GATE. So again, if you have any interest in any of those online courses or want more information about what each of those courses entail, it would behoove you to visit our website. We have all that information on there, and I'll put that link up at the very end of the presentation. Okay, so let's get to why you guys are all really here. Today's presenter is Kim Dodds. She is, as I mentioned before, the coordinator of GATE Teacher Training and Parent Education over at Newport Mesa Unified School District. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball on to Kim. So Kim, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. My name is Kim, and I am a teacher on special assignment for Newport Mesa GATE, and I do have a wonderful privilege of being able to work with the teachers in Newport Mesa and our parents as well. So tonight we will be talking about differentiation, and my goal really is to help you understand what it is that the California State Standards for Gifted and Talented Students say specific to curriculum and instruction. So my goal is by the end of the evening you'll have an idea of things that you can look for in the classroom if you are a parent, or if you are a teacher, things that you can check off your list that indeed you are in alignment with our GATE standards, or perhaps maybe you'll generate a list of things that you might want to add to what it is that you're already implementing with your curriculum and instruction. So what differentiation should look like. In our state standards, if you're unfamiliar with them, you can look at them when you visit the CAG website at www.cagifted.org. And specifically, the standards state related to curriculum and instruction that the differentiated curriculum focuses primarily on depth and complexity of content, and we'll speak more specifically to this in a moment. Talks about advanced or accelerated pacing, novelty, which represents unique and original expressions of student understanding, and that there is alignment of the differentiated curriculum that is in alignment with instructional strategies that promote inquiry, self-directed learning, discussion, debate, metacognition, which represents thinking about one's thinking. So really allowing our students to talk about how is it that they were able to solve that math problem, or when they were creating a poster that might represent something from a social studies lesson, what were they thinking about when they chose the words they recorded on their chart paper or the pictures that they drew? It also represents the appropriate modes of learning, and as teachers we recognize that students learn in a variety of ways, and that as teachers we will employ a multitude of strategies to ensure that all kids can be successful. Differentiated instruction has a variety of definitions by many different people, but something that they have in common is the fact that differentiated instruction is intended to modify the curriculum to meet the unique needs of learners. And this may include the modification in complexity, depth, pacing, or the selection among curricular areas and perhaps compacting or converging the curriculum to meet the needs of the children. Modification is, again, dependent upon the individual needs of the students. Most importantly, differentiated curriculum provides multiple paths for success in all classrooms, and that it is designed to challenge gifted students. And with this, we talk about the importance of varying our curriculum based on the content, meaning the subject matter that we're learning, perhaps a piece of literature we're reading or something in social studies. Maybe we are studying the Native Americans in the 4th grade, but maybe not everybody needs to use the textbook, so we can use multiple resources. We can also vary the process, and that's the thinking skill that's required. Some children might need to maybe list or define or identify things, whereas maybe others would be more well-suited to note different perspectives or perhaps prove with evidence or determine fact from opinion when studying. So as teachers, we modify our curriculum so that all children are learning the same topic, but it might be that the content, meaning the resource, or perhaps the thinking skill, the process, is different. In addition, the product could vary. Maybe some students are making maybe a diorama while another is preparing a debate to run in the classroom. Another aspect, pardon me, I'm having a problem, is that the educational practices involve authentic assessment. It's imperative that as teachers of the gifted and all students that we are using formative assessment to drive our curricular decisions. We encourage collaborative learning, thematic interdisciplinary instruction, a big word, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but a very, very important aspect of curriculum in our classrooms. And it's important that we include all of these things because combined, this will facilitate differentiated instruction for our students. Something I find to be very important is this slide where Caroline Tomlinson says that there is no one right way to create an effectively differentiated classroom, that teachers craft responsive learning places that are a good match for their teaching styles as well as their learners' needs. And this to me is one of my favorite quotes because as a teacher myself and now as a teacher on special assignment visiting a variety of classrooms, this is something I see. While every classroom is differentiating their instruction, the ways in which teachers differentiate is different. Just like you and I are different, every teacher needs to modify their curriculum and their instruction based on their perspective, their particular philosophy on learning, as well as the needs of their students in their classroom. So while in classroom A they might be building the mission, but classroom B isn't, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It means that the teacher is being responsive to the needs of their student. And I think that's imperative that we all remember that. Thematic interdisciplinary instruction. You'll notice that I have two icons. These are prompts, and the flower represents details, and then the circle that says past, present, and future, that represents change over time. You might be familiar with these if you're a teacher or a parent who has seen these in the classroom, and what I wanted to do is provide a comparison between the perspective of CAG and a man named Ralph Tyler. Recently I was doing some studying, and I came across some work of Ralph Tyler. He wrote a book many years ago, in 1949 actually. It's a small book but a very powerful book, and he talks about curriculum, and he talks about the importance of creating curriculum that is designed with what he considers to be organizing principles. And in our GATE world, if you will, the idea of thematic interdisciplinary instruction parallels beautifully the idea of organizing principles. And if you look at the right side of the slide, you'll see that there's 3 bullet points. And Ralph Tyler says that organizing principles, they are needed so that they can serve as a basis for planning the respects in which the broadening and the deepening of the major curriculum elements in a program take place. This is imperative because in the state of California, you're all aware we have state standards. What we need to ensure with our gifted kids is that our students aren't only meeting these standards, but instead that they are exceeding the standards as well. And through differentiated instruction that truly is thematic and interdisciplinary, we can attain these goals of more complex thinking and a more rich, deep understanding of our curriculum. He talks about the importance of identifying elements that are relevant to and significant to the field and to the total curriculum. Here, he's really referencing the idea of looking at a universal concept, maybe something such as change, and viewing it across the disciplines and even assuming the role of an expert, thinking like a disciplinarian that we'll talk about shortly. So Ralph Tyler talks about these organizing principles and how important they are to provide depth to a study. The same is the perspective of the California Association for the Gifted. If you look at the left side of the slide, you'll see that it says that learning experiences are focused specific to a topic or a global concept such as change. And this is beautiful because think of a needle that threads things together beautifully, it sews something together. That's what change can do, or a universal concept such as power or systems. If children are in the classroom and their teacher asks them to consider the system of multiplication, they might also ask them to consider the systems found within the government. And then maybe also they look at how systems are made of parts and look at the characters in a story. And they look at how is it that one character is so important to another character. And so we can look at this universal concept across the disciplines so that our students realize that reading and math and social studies and science, they aren't isolated, but instead they are all connected in one way or another. And the last bullet says that CAG supports the use of thematic curriculum that is defined and focused and allows for continuous in-depth interdisciplinary learning for gifted students. And in many of our classrooms throughout the state of California, there is indeed evidence of a universal concept, patterns perhaps, order, systems, change, power, conflict, or some that you might have already seen yourself, or perhaps if you're a teacher, may already be using in your classroom. This diagram here just talks about, in the center you'll see the core curriculum, and that is something that every child in the state of California, in our nation, needs to learn is our basic core grade level curriculum. But it's the depth, the complexity, the novelty, and the acceleration that does provide for differentiated learning, a more in-depth, more complex understanding of the curriculum. On the right side of your slides right now, you'll see a red bulletin board that has lots of iconic prompts. And these are the prompts of depth and complexity with the white background. And then with the black background, these are the prompts of the content imperatives. We'll talk about both of them in a moment, but I wanted to let you know that depth and complexity came to be from a group of people, including Dr. Kaplan from the University of Southern California, and this group came together and they examined the Golden State exam and the AP and the IB programs, and they looked to see what is it that kids need to understand, what is inherent in all disciplines of study, what can increase sophistication of content, what can foster critical and analytical thinking, and they noticed some patterns, they noticed some trends, and from there they devised these prompts of depth and complexity. It was really in response to the new frameworks in California and this idea of an increased thinking curriculum. And so it's the prompts that can provide for this sophistication of content and increased critical and analytical thinking. So if you are already familiar with these prompts of depth and complexity, pardon my introduction. If you are unfamiliar with them, you are ready to learn something new. The lists here that you see on your screen, they represent language of the discipline. This is the vocabulary of the expert. If you were the biologist, what vocabulary would you use when studying the life cycle? If you were the sociologist studying a group of people, what vocabulary would you use when learning about this particular group? The flower represents details. Details are parts that make a whole. Details are facts. The Z represents patterns. Patterns repeat. They are predictable. We can expect an outcome. In first grade, we can talk about patterns of red, blue, triangle, square, or kids can recognize patterns that they see in clothing, patterns that they see in books, patterns that they see in history. This symbol represents trends. Trends are an example of a pattern that we can note over time. The three question marks represent unanswered questions, and these are the true questions that the disciplinarians, the experts in the field of study, have. It's not the question of, what will I have for dessert tonight? But instead, they are the unanswered questions of the scientist. They are the unanswered questions of the historian, the questions that are still puzzling to the discipline. This system of hierarchy that you see on your screen, this represents rules. Rules follow in order. Rules might have something that is more important that is led by factors that will support it. Rules can be found in multiplication, in grammar, in government, etc. This diamond that is black and white represents ethics, good and bad, moral, immoral, right, wrong. This little house type diagram that you see right now, this represents big idea. And big idea is directly related to the idea of a universal concept. If in my classroom I talk about the idea of change, and we are working hard often to prove or disprove perhaps that one change leads to another, one change leads to another is a big idea. That's a generalization. It's a statement we can make about the concept of change. Complexity includes relating things over time. We can look at what things were like in the past, the present, and future. We can look at the concept of community. We can look at the concept of transportation. And while we might be studying current transportation systems, we might look back and see how was it that they traveled 100 years ago? How was it that they traveled 50 years ago? And what has led to these changes over time? The eyeglasses represent different perspectives. We really work hard to help our students understand that people do have different points of view. And when we read a piece of literature, we can analyze it from the perspective of the student, from the perspective of the author. We can also analyze it from the perspective of a disciplinarian. Perhaps I'm reading a work of literature and I want to analyze it from the perspective of maybe the anthropologist, because I might be able to study the particular people in the story if that's applicable, and notice maybe their details, the patterns of their daily life, and assume the role of an expert. The triangle, square, and circle, this represents across disciplines. This is really how we are able to help our students understand that concept of thematic interdisciplinary instruction. If I'm talking about the rules, perhaps in multiplication, I might be able to say after my math lesson, when is it that we also use rules throughout our school day? And somebody might say, oh, it's a rule that I must always begin my sentence with a capital letter. Or maybe it's a rule that I have to line up outside our classroom when the recess bell rings. So we can look at how is it that rules perhaps happen in places other than our math lesson. The content imperatives support the prompts of depth and complexity. The prompt that you see on the top of your screen that is a black square with the two white lines, this represents parallels. So while we might be studying the American Revolution, we could also be looking at what else is happening in this time in history in another place. Or what events parallel the events of the American Revolution, perhaps in current day? What can we say about leadership? What can we say about the roles of men and women? This icon that you see that looks sort of like a sun beginning to welcome the day, this represents origin. Origin is the beginning. It is the creation, the start of something. The three arrows that you see pointing downward, this represents contributions. Contributions are the effects. They are the results of something. They perhaps lead to change over time. This symbol that has arrows going in opposite directions, this represents paradox. Things that might seem to be so odd, so paradoxical to one another, something that might seem to be contradictory but yet important to whatever it might be contradicting. I know that sounds a little odd. And then, oops, not clicking. The three arrows coming together, this represents convergence, things coming together. So you might ask students to describe the origin of the change over time. We can look at characters in a story and say, when is it that the character's role began to change? Or perhaps we can look at an event in history and say, how is it that the events leading to the American Revolution have created something? So what was the origin of that change? So what I'd like you to do is look at these three pictures here. These are of the Olympics, something that many people this summer watched on TV. And you see that there are examples of medals and the traditional rings that exemplify the Olympics, and then the torch. Here I now have for you the icon for Big Idea. And in the top of the icon it says that power is present in many forms. Here it says, prove with evidence the big idea. Power is present in many forms. I want you to think to yourself for a moment, and if you don't mind, send a chat message. I believe you're able to do so. What evidence did you see or read about or hear about in the Summer Olympics that might prove or even disprove the idea that power is present in many forms? I'll give you a moment if you can chat that.
I'm actually going,
I don't see any answers being recorded. But let me see, maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot.
you know what? I don't think that it's going to show it.
Okay. I will just continue.
I'll do it one more time, but hold on one second, Kim. Let me give you a call back.
Okay. Okay, I'm not certain that you were able to record.
Yep. I think some of them are going to show up.
Oh, you do?
Well, maybe not. Yeah, it didn't capture everybody.
Okay, so can I start talking again? How will I know?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm sorry, I can't see any responses if you might have typed in anything, but perhaps one could say, power is present in many forms because when I watch the gymnasts, they can spring off of the, I'm drawing a blank on that big horse thing that they do a pike off of, but nevertheless, the gymnast has power when doing a round-off back tuck. Or perhaps I can say that when watching track and field and they are pole vaulting, there is extreme power that an athlete needs in order to run, dig the pole to the ground, and fly over the bar. I could also say that there's power because there's important people that are in charge of the Olympics, and one person has greater say than another. Or perhaps I could look at the amount of gold, silver, and bronze medals that was won by the different countries and say one country represents power because they have more gold medals than another. So if we do this, we allow students to share their interest. If they've been researching, they can identify different forms of power, but they're able to see that power is not just present in one form, that it is present in many and varied ways. When we talk about integrating depth and complexity and the content imperatives into the core curriculum, it looks very different in many classrooms. Often people are concerned that their child is in a gate classroom, but it looks as though what their child is doing is no different than the child sitting next to them. And truly, that is the beauty of differentiated learning. That is the beauty of a teacher being a master of their profession and being able to craft lessons where every child in that classroom feels safe, where every child in that classroom is provided a learning opportunity that is appropriate to their needs. So when studying something perhaps like the example on your screen right now where we're talking about looking at the structural features of literature, every child in the classroom could be reading fairy tales and fantasies and legends and myths. And maybe every child is looking for patterns and every child is looking for rules. But the work that is the result of the lesson would be very, very different. So if you were to come into my classroom, you might observe a lesson where the students are asked to identify the patterns and the rules associated with various imaginative forms of literature. They're going to read multiple pieces of literature. They will use the rules and the patterns they have identified to write their own version of a fable, a fantasy, a myth, a fairy tale, a legend. So while I'm teaching my students, I might say to my student, Kathy, who is a wonderful reader who has read every fairy tale known to man, I might say, Kathy, I know you've read Cinderella, and I know you've read Beauty and the Beast, and I know you love Rumpelstiltskin, but I have a fairy tale that comes from another country. And I want you to read this fairy tale, and I want you to look for the patterns, and I want for you to look for the rules. And then in my class, I might be mainstreaming a child from maybe the special day classroom, and I'll say, you know what, Bill? We're going to sit together today, and we are going to read the fairy tale together, and we are going to look for patterns. We want to see what keeps happening over and over and over again. And I bet we can find some rules, because in fairy tales, things happen in threes. There's always magic. We want to find evidence of the rules. And in the end, we're all going to come back together and we're going to share the patterns we found and the rules we found. So Kathy, my beautiful reader who's reading a fairy tale from another country, she'll say, oh, the fairy tale I read, this was the pattern I found. And then Bill, the boy that I might be mainstreaming, he says, I found a pattern, this is what happened. So every child gets the opportunity to share their findings, every child looking for patterns, every child looking for rules. But it's that content that I, as the teacher, have modified. And so every child is having an appropriate learning experience, which is important for all. If I'm looking at 5th grade, the next slide you see here is an example of reading comprehension, analysis of grade level text. I might ask my students to analyze the details while reading a selected text to identify a big idea. So perhaps in my classroom, maybe my universal concept is systems. And we are going to read a piece of work, and we are going to prove that systems interact, meaning that one system is dependent upon another system, or they do something together. So we're going to read it, we're going to look for details, and we want to prove this big idea. In addition to using depth and complexity in our classroom, there's a way that we can provide acceleration and novelty with our students, and that is through the think like a disciplinarian strategies, where the students indeed assume the role of an expert. As you will see here in this explanation, it says that think like a disciplinarian provides opportunities within the classroom that challenge gifted learners to explore the advanced and sophisticated complex concepts in the disciplines by assuming the role of different disciplinarians. I was recently grading some work for the teachers that I train, and I kept a few and I brought them with me tonight to share with you because when reading the reflections of my teachers and their use of think like a disciplinarian in their classroom, I was so pleased and proud and a little envious that I couldn't have been in the classroom with the students learning. One teacher used a Time for Kids magazine, and many classrooms receive these publications, and she told the kids that when they read Time for Kids this week that they weren't just reading it like they normally do and doing the worksheet like they typically do, but instead this week that their job would be to assume the role of the sociologist. And she explained what the sociologist was interested in studying, and she was very clear in helping the students understand that while they were going to be looking at a topic related to the war in Afghanistan, they were not to be giving their opinions. Instead, they were to assume the role of the disciplinarian. This was a 5th grade classroom, and in the teacher's reflection, she said that the students were going to be looking to prove or disprove the big idea of change and that it is inevitable. And in her reflection, she wrote that her students took a very mature approach to the discussion, that the students were able to think outside of the box. She said that one even noticed in the article that it stated that the Allies were fighting with us and that we must have good relationships with other countries. She also noted that the students found that they enjoyed the challenge, and she was completely impressed with the level of conversation. A middle school teacher also submitted a lesson to me recently in which they were thinking like sociologists also, and they were discussing the different groups that existed during the time of the Holocaust and what the sociologist might identify when examining them. And she notes that they discussed the daily life patterns of the Jews both in hiding and in the concentration camps and of those who fled. She said they discussed the positive and negative relationships that the people had made and how the relationships made contributions to their lives. Her personal comment to me was that she felt the lesson went very well and that she thought it was an innovative way for her students to assume the role of disciplinarians, to better understand complex concepts. And I loved that she wrote that. The idea of helping her kids understand complex concepts. And when we provide our students these opportunities, we are completely opening the door for them to demonstrate their innovation, their creativity, their critical thinking, and most importantly, their understanding. So the new slide that I've presented for you, this is directly linked to a 4th grade standard. So if you're a parent of a 4th grader or perhaps a teacher of a 4th grader, you might have your students think like a cartographer, the person who loves to make maps. And you could do so by asking them to study the regions of California, specifically looking for the details that's represented by the prompt of a flower. They could look for the language of the discipline. As the cartographer making a map of the regions of California, they need to understand specific vocabulary. To the left of the frame, you will see that it says that they will note change over time because they are writing a paragraph to describe the change that has occurred over time in a region of their choice, specific to the growth of towns, land use, transportation, and architecture. And finally, it is their job to state in their opinion if it is indeed true that systems are made of parts that work together, and the students have to list 4 details to support their opinion. You'll note that I have not given specific reference to a textbook or a particular resource. That would be my role as the teacher, to provide my students with the resources necessary to master this grade level standard. And it would also be my decision as the teacher to make the pedagogical choices, the teaching choices of what would I teach whole group? What will I teach in a small group? What can some students do all by themselves? This next slide asks students to think like a historian. And I apologize, in the circle on the bottom, the icons are overlapped. But here, the students are to explain the causes of the American Revolution. And this comes straight from the state standards, and if you're in 5th grade, you are expected to understand the political and the religious and the economic ideas and the interests that brought about the American Revolution. And they have to consider the Stamp Act. They have to consider the coercive acts and also taxes on tea. So when studying this, it's very important that students understand the origin. Why did all of this begin? Where did all of this begin? How did all of this begin? Who started all of this? So if we focus our students' attention on the origin, that can be our first layer, sort of like a delicious chocolate cake that someone might make for my birthday. One layer would be the origin. Next, I'm going to add another layer. Once I have an idea of the who and the what and the where, the when, the how, I then can look for the contributions and the different perspectives. How is it that different people were integral during this time period? And we could then understand the people and the events associated with drafting and signing the Declaration of Independence, as you can read the rest of the standard. The final layer could be, again, different perspectives, asking kids to look at the key individuals during this time period and make a comparison. So we're going to layer the student's knowledge, first beginning with the origin, then looking at the contributions and the different perspectives, and then again analyzing the perspectives of key political figures. In a classroom, you might see this on charts. You might see it in words. You might see it in a bulletin board. I gave you some examples of thinking like a biologist when looking at the plant and the animal cells on the right-hand side. In the center, thinking like a philosopher and analyzing a piece of text. And then on your left, you'll notice that this is a whiteboard where there are some people, and while it's from a distance, the red side is for thinking like a historian and helping young children in the 2nd grade learn what does it mean to think like a historian, that person who loves history, who is curious about people and places of the past. So there's different ways that you might see think like a disciplinarian in your child's classroom or in your own classroom. Independent study. This is one of the most wonderful ways that we can provide increased understanding of a content area for our students. As you know, if you are a parent or if you are a teacher, children come to us knowing quite a bit. They have access to many resources. They see things on TV. They see things when they're riding to school in the car or the school bus. They play on the internet. They have the opportunity to listen to conversations, and they have a lot of things they wonder about. And independent study is that perfect place for them to ask those questions that they would love to answer. It provides students, as you can read, with an opportunity to conduct research on a self-selected topic by completing the steps necessary for nonfiction research. The students that you see here are quite proud as they display their very hard work. The steps of independent study include selecting a topic, forming a research question, and now this is not just a who, what, where, when, why type question, but instead, as a scholar, we expect students to ask questions using perhaps the prompts of depth and complexity. We expect our students to ask questions using what we call keywords. So they might ask, what was the significance of Louis Pasteur's discoveries? Or what is the importance of blank? What is the effect of such and such? So students will form questions using keywords or perhaps the prompts of depth and complexity. They gather research. Something that's very important for scholarly study is that they use varied resources. We aren't just going to do a quick Google search and see what we can find, but instead we will go to the library and we'll check out some books. We might, if we have the opportunity, interview someone. I recently was doing some work with a student who wanted to know more about the eye, and he was very interested in how it worked. So, being that he wore glasses, he made an appointment with his eye doctor, and he was able to talk and learn all about the eye. And for his independent study project, he made a model of the eye and was able to tell all about the different parts and the function of the parts. Students analyze information. They take notes. This here is the teacher's responsibility to help students learn how to take notes, perhaps on note cards, in the form of an outline, any way that is of organization and importance for the teacher and the student. Students then summarize their findings, perhaps by writing a paragraph, answering their questions in complete sentences, and then they form new unanswered questions. After studying a topic, you might want to know more about what it is that you studied, or perhaps in your study, you thought of something new you want to learn more about. This year in my school district we have an independent study showcase event, and one student was curious about the swimsuits that she saw in the Olympics, and she noticed that men and women were wearing long swimsuits, and she wanted to know about the purpose of them and what was the significance of wearing more of a swimsuit. And she contacted Speedo, and they lent her an Olympic swimsuit. And they even connected her with Janet Evans, and she had a poolside interview with the Olympian. So, wonderful opportunities for kids when conducting independent study. In the end, we love for our students to evaluate our performance, or rather their performance. At the very beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that in the standards for curriculum and instruction, it talks about metacognition, the idea of kids thinking about their thinking, reflecting on their learning. And the self-evaluation is a wonderful place for students to evaluate what was their work ethic like. Did they use varied resources? Did they try their best? What could they improve upon? So that completes my portion of the presentation.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. We're going to go ahead and open up for questions.
Okay.
I'm going to leave the screen up for everybody. My name is Amanda, as I said, so my email address is ayngelmo@uci.edu. If for some reason we don't get to your question today, please feel free to email me directly with your question, and I will try to get you the answer. Okay, so first question for you, Kim. Here we go.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I'm able to see the responses that people have posted, and thank you for the pommel horse for what the called over. I appreciate that.
One question from the chat, actually, and then we're going to go down to the Q&A. And if you have any additional questions, please submit them via Q&A. But the first question was, as a teacher, how does differentiation work for students with inconsistent work habits?
Okay, a few things. Well, inconsistent work habits meaning sometimes they are stellar and they work real hard, and other times they're lazy and don't get much done. Well, I liken that to even myself. There's times when I am on the ball and I do an exemplary job. And then there's times when I'm tired, or I'm hungry, or I'm grumpy, and I don't do as good of a job. And so I think that's something that's really important that we talk to our students about, because we have expectations for our kids that they will be on the ball, number one, all the time. But in reality, as human beings, we aren't like that all of the time. And there are things that we might have more patience for. Someone who might love to read books could read all day long, but solving 100 math problems could be their worst nightmare. So I think it's a give-take. I think it's, of course, you are the teacher and you have expectations, but I think you have a conversation with the kids. I think that often we forget about that and say, what's going on today? I've noticed that you're really writing really sloppy today, or I'm noticing that there isn't much detail to this. Let me read this to you. What would you add to the story that you wrote today? Or what might you even take away? I can even relate that today. I was tutoring after school, and a boy that I work with, he doesn't like to write much, and so we back and forth. He writes one week, then I'm his scribe the next, and he was writing about his speakers for his iPod today, and it was 5 sentences, and they were very, very basic. So I read it back to him, and he said, that sounds like a kindergartner wrote this. And I said, oh, interesting. So what can we do? Because you are a 3rd grader. And so we talked about it and then put it back on him, and he added to it. And so I think it's a matter of, obviously, you as a teacher or you as a parent, you have expectations, but I do think that identifying the important goal of the lesson, perhaps providing students with a rubric. If you are shooting for a 4, 3, 2, 1, here's what you need to do. Give them clear expectations, too.
Great. Okay, next question, Kim. Do I need to feed students the big idea and have them just fill in the columns, or should I expect students to be able to construct their own big idea?
Wonderful question. That goes either way. Okay, if we want to feed our students the big idea, that would be considered deductive reasoning. Today, boys and girls, we are going to prove with evidence that change is inevitable. And then we're going to read all about mission systems. And we're going to read about them maybe for 2 weeks in school. And in the end, we want to find all of the facts that prove that change is inevitable. That would be sort of us feeding them the big idea. Or we can do the opposite and think inductively. pretend we've been studying the missions for 4 or 6 weeks or something, and we come in from lunchtime and the whiteboard is completely blank, and I say, I want you to raise your hand, and I will call on each of you as many times as you'd like. I want you to tell me everything you know about the mission system. And you would write down everything the students say, and then you say, we need to categorize this information. We need to form some groups. And then they form some groups, and they talk about things that were maybe natural or man-made in these different systems. And then you say, you know, we talk about systems all the time in our classroom. And right now we've just created groups that say that some things are natural and some things are man-made. If we put these together and with our big idea, or excuse me, our universal concept of systems, what could we say? And the students could maybe then say systems can be natural or man-made, or systems come in different forms. So there's opportunities for us as teachers to say this is exactly what we're looking for today, the big idea, or present them with some information and say, what's the big idea? So it can be done inductively or deductively.
Okay,
Your
great.
choice.
All right, next question, Kim. My teachers need classroom management help while working with groups and allowing students to work on independent study projects. Do you have any tips?
Certainly. A few ideas. Something very basic, but it's always worked for me. I did attend USC, so my example will include USC. But I will draw on the whiteboard a set of lips, small, medium, and large. And the small lips are a level 1, the medium lips are a level 2, and the big lips are a level 3. SC has just beat UCLA. And we talk about the different voice levels that we have in our classroom. And so there's times in our classroom when we're quiet, regular voices, or, you know, really excited. Well, that's one way that I am able to kind of create an environment where the noise level is appropriate. But more importantly, with management of students, I will always call my students together on the floor, even my 5th graders. I pull them all on the floor, and I begin the lesson whole group, always. And then I break them up into small group, one-on-one, or independent learning. And when I do that, I give specific directions that I write on the whiteboard or I put up on the chart paper so that the students are prepared. Because we've started together and then we branch off, there are clear expectations on the board. Now, that's what I do, say, for social studies or math time. If it's during my reading group time, when I'm doing guided reading, my students know that if they are at seat work doing their grammar pages or their weekend news or whatever it might be, that they are not to interrupt my reading lesson with my small group unless they have already asked somebody else in their particular seat work group for help and they don't get it. And if they have asked and they still can't complete the task at hand, they can write me a note on a Post-it. I will read it and respond to them when I have the opportunity. And so it's just a system of asking others in the classroom, but one thing that I try my best at is first explaining every single task. If I'm asking my students to work at a learning center, I have made sure that every aspect of that learning center has been explained and the kids understand the expectation of the task at the learning center. If they're working on an independent study and they are having to do research on the computer, I'll partner them with someone so that they have somebody that can help in finding references.
Okay, great.
I hope that helps.
I'm going to jump around a little bit that way we get a variety of questions in here. One participant asked, I'm a parent. What can I ask the teachers to get a sense of what they're doing to teach my gifted child who's in a regular classroom? And before you answer really quickly, I just want everyone to know that next week we will be having a webinar on building the parent-teacher connection. So that will also we'll go into depth more about that next week. But Kim, your snippet of advice.
Sure. Asking as a parent going into your classroom, some things you can do. Look around the room. That's one of the most important, I guess, tools that you have is just to walk around the classroom and look at the bulletin boards. What evidence of work do you see on the walls? And then if you walked around the room, you can use that as your icebreaker, if you will, to ask questions to the teacher. And you could say, so tell me about what you're learning in math, because when Charlie comes home from school, he does not tell me anything. Can you help me out? And then the teacher will tell you and say, well, recently I learned of prompts of depth and complexity. Is this something that you use in the classroom? Or you could ask, how is it that you differentiate instruction in your classroom? Do all of the students use the same resources all of the time? I mean, these are legitimate questions that you can ask. Sure, most districts and school sites have prescribed curriculum. We have reading books, we have math books that we use, and many of us follow strict pacing plans. But we do modify our curriculum based on our instructional decisions, or if we are able to add to our resources that we use. So I think if you go in and you ask your teacher, what resources are they using, how are they differentiating instruction, that they'll be able to tell you.
Okay, great. Okay, next one. Can you give a quick example of differentiation that can occur in a high school classroom?
Sure, differentiation in the high school classroom. The prompts of depth and complexity in the classroom are wonderful. I know many of our high schools use the prompts of depth and complexity. But again, just like in the elementary grades, the middle school grades, when we talk about differentiating according to content, process, and product, the content meaning the text that is being used, the process meaning the thinking skill. And thinking skills related to, say, Bloom's taxonomy, they range from simple to complex. So differentiated instruction in the high school could be some students are maybe comparing and contrasting characters in a story, or comparing and contrasting different elements on the periodic table in a science experiment, whereas others might be proving with evidence a big idea. Proving with evidence is a more sophisticated thinking skill than compare and contrast. So it could be done through the process. The product could also be varied. For some students, writing a 3-paragraph essay is appropriate. For others, perhaps creating a PowerPoint presentation to share in the class might be appropriate. Or perhaps everybody creates a PowerPoint presentation. It's just the depth or the complexity of the presentation that's varied.
Great. What about grading considerations, Kim, as you're differentiating some of these topics?
Perfect. In my classroom, I'm always using rubrics. I use a 4, 3, 2, 1 scale, and I create them depending on the learning objective that I have set for the particular task. And so if I say that students will note patterns, students will write complete paragraphs, students will do whatever. If a student notes a pattern that might be less sophisticated, say, than another student who notes a pattern, they've still noted a pattern, so they would still get that credit. So just because somebody isn't, quote, GATE or hasn't been labeled as such doesn't mean that they aren't still going to be exemplary. Just as it means that just because you're labeled GATE doesn't mean you're always going to be exemplary.
Okay. And what part of the differentiation process does motivation factor in?
Oh, okay. Wonderful, wonderful question. Huge. Something actually that I found very interesting this year in my work with my middle school teachers, in differentiating their instruction with their instructional choices, where they've given up a little bit of that control of doing a whole group lecture all the time, but instead breaking the kids into small group, allowing them to chat, discuss, create posters, and share out loud with the group. When I'm reading the reflections of my teachers or visiting their classrooms, the engagement is so powerful. The kids are on task. The behavior problems are decreasing because the students have ownership of what they're learning. It's not like they're just walking into the class and the teacher is speaking to them. Instead, it's a collaborative learning environment.
Okay. How do you explain to students the fact that they are being assigned different projects to produce? For example, one is writing a report and one is creating a PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do if they would prefer the other assignment?
Sure. Okay. Well, a couple things. Well, in my classroom, pretend that we have varied products. Somebody's writing a paragraph and somebody else is doing, say, a PowerPoint. Then I would say we'd all start together and say everybody is proving with evidence a big idea. And today we are going to do it in a few different ways. X, Y, and Z, you are going to work together on the computer and you are going to make a PowerPoint presentation. A, B, and C, you guys are going to work together to make a report. You're writing paragraphs, and you will present yours in a moment, or not a moment, but in time. And so because there's a lot of choice, a lot of different products all the time, the kids see it as a way of sharing information. Just because they don't get to do the PowerPoint because that's novel doesn't mean that they won't do it next time.
Okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. In your experience, Kim, how has it been the easiest to assure parents of, say, a private school or even a public school, that differentiated learning for remedial students doesn't mean a lower expectation for the class as a whole.
Great, great, great. Differentiated instruction is important for all students, for our gifted kids, for our English language learners who aren't identified as gifted, for our students that we mainstream. It's because we are trying to meet the needs of the kids. And so we are using as teachers our knowledge of curriculum and our knowledge of instruction to modify the curriculum so that every person is successful in meeting or exceeding the standards. So if you're coming new from a private school into a public school and your teacher is an advocate of differentiated instruction, your child is going to be experiencing learning that it's called culturally responsive pedagogy in official context, and it talks about really responding to the background knowledge of kids, working within what we call their zone of proximal development. That means that it's not too hard, it's not too easy, it's right where it should be so that we can take it one step farther.
Perfect. I think we have time for about one more question.
Sure.
What number of students makes an effective small group at either the elementary school level, the middle school level, or the high school level? What have you found to be the best number of students to make an effective small group?
Well, I think that effective small groups vary. I mean, one person might say 4 people is an effective small group, another might say 7, somebody else might say 9. It's totally dependent upon your classroom structure. I mean, when I've taught primary grades and I've had smaller groups of kids, I can have small groups of 4 or 6. When I've taught upper grades with many children, I might have a small group of 8 or 9. It's just totally dependent upon the kids and you as a teacher.
Okay, great. I think that's about all the time we have. I know we didn't get to everybody's question. As I said, please feel free to email me directly, and I will forward as many as I can on to Kim or the other resources we have here at UCI Extension. Just a couple of things to keep in mind. You will hopefully receive, if you signed up through the website, a recording of the session. If for some reason in 24 hours, so if for some reason by tomorrow night you haven't received an email with that recording, you can access the recording manually by going to uci.webex.com, clicking recorded sessions, and then looking up the title of this webinar, which was What Differentiation Should Look Like. And again, next week we're going to continue this series with Building the Parent-Teacher Connection, and that presentation will be by Katie Hickox, and there's still time to register for that on the website, and it'll be the same time, 8 to 9 p.m., and you can also receive a recording of that if you register. So, Kim, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us tonight and providing us with all this excellent knowledge about differentiation. I really appreciate it. I know our participants did too, and I wanted to thank everybody for coming and sharing this hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for everybody who logged on, and thank you too very much, Amanda.
All right. Well, everyone have a great night, and as I said, there's my email address. That's the website for our GATE program, and have a great rest of the evening. Take care. Bye.